Senate chamber.
Recorded, broadcast out Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay in moving between any public and private sessions, so please be patient with the system. I can also advise that those who will be joining us in public area are welcome to use mobile phone devices as long as they're on airplane mode and those devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available in the gallery rules and it's not permitted to record any part of the proceedings today. So we'll proceed to the agenda. Members, we have no apologies today, and we have Padraig Delargy, MLA, joining us online. And Padraig, if you could indicate if you could see or hear us just when you come on screen. Okay, members, can I refer you to the pack for a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting on the 14th of November, page 6. Can I seek agreement for those minutes?
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Members, anyone any relevant declaration of interest to declare for this meeting? No?
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, Chair.
Go ahead, yeah.
Chair, just as Sinn Féin spokesperson on further and higher information and also a participant in a Skill Up programme as part of my brief.
Thank you, Padraig. Okay, members, at page 14 of your pack is a response from Peter May, Accounting Officer for the Department of Health, regarding delays in completion of the Royal Maternity Hospital. Are members content to note this correspondence and forward it to the Northern Ireland Audit Office for inclusion in the report? Okay. Members, at page 3 of your table pack is a letter from Hawks advising of her availability to attend the Public Accounts Committee for a further evidence session as part of the inquiry into major capital projects. She has provided a response in request to the information that was provided, and Ms Brady has indicated that she is available on either the 16th or the 30th of January. So members, are you content to invite Ms Brady and the Department of Finance Accounting Officer, Neil Gibson, to attend on the 16th of January, by which stage the committee will hopefully have the information that has been requested, which will enable a more informative discussion and session. Members agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, members. Are you also content that in writing to Ms Brady and Mr Gibson, we indicate that we would also like to take this opportunity to clarify any outstanding points as per the correspondence from Mr Gibson concerning the Northern Ireland Audit Office follow-up report on the implementation of the RHI recommendations? All agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, members. And are you content that we also forward this letter to the Northern Ireland Audit Office in respect of our inquiry into major capital projects?
Yep.
Okay, members. Page 5 of your table pack is a letter from Mr Ronnie Armour confirming his attendance and that of his Department of Education officials at the evidence session on the 5th of December in relation to our skills inquiry, in particular around the provision of skills and education training for 14 to 19-year-olds. And Ronnie is the interim accounting officer for the Department of Education at this time. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, members. We'll move on now to agenda item 6, which is the inquiry on developing the skills for Northern Ireland's future evidence session. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome to the meeting Ian Snowden, the Accounting Officer for the Department for the Economy, Graham Wilkinson, Director for Skills Division, Department for Economy. They'll be joining us as I read these out. Moira Doherty, Deputy Secretary for the Department of Economy, and Dorina Carville, our Controller and Auditor General. Stuart Stevenson's also joining us from the Treasury Officer of Accounts, and Julie Sewell, who is the Public Audit and Accountability for the Department of Finance. Members, can I refer you to the relevant papers relating to this agenda item, which are at pages 75 to 90. And I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr Snowden, Mr Wilkinson and Ms Doherty. You're very welcome to the Public Accounts Committee. We appreciate your time with us today. We have a number of questions for you. Members will collectively ask those. And there'll be a number of themes. For instance, the progress towards the skills strategy, spend in this area, skills data, the skills landscape and the skills council, joined up working across government and the approach to education and training for 14 to 19-year-olds. So we make the best use of our time this afternoon. Can you please keep answers brief? Members do have quite a lot of questions and will undoubtedly have follow-up questions. And just as a word of caution from this Public Accounts Committee, if we find you deviating from the topic, we'll very quickly ask you to return to the subject area. So don't take our bluntness as, in any way as a reflection of yourselves. It's just we want to keep this very tight and get to the nub of the issues today. So thank you very much for being with us, and I know members will be doing the same as well. So with that said, Mr. Snowden, can I ask you and Mr. Wilkinson and Ms. Doherty to give us some brief opening remarks?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair, and members for inviting us to engage with you on this subject today. I'll start by reflecting on the fact that the Northern Ireland economy is performing really well at present. Our unemployment rate is at an unprecedentedly low level of 1.9%, and we have a very tight labour market. Now, if the economy is going to continue to develop in line with the ambitions in the programme for government, then we need to ensure that employers have access to, and those who want to invest here, have access to a supply of skilled workers. Developing the skills of the population is also crucial for improving levels of economic and social inclusion. So it's impossible to overstate the importance of the skills agenda. And that's why we welcome the Audit Office report and look forward to engaging with the committee on it today. The Department has accepted the Audit Office's recommendations, and work is already underway to address the issues that have been identified in the report. The Department has been and will continue to be very active in looking for new ways in which we can provide opportunities for individuals to reach their potential and for businesses to get access to the skills they need to be able to innovate, compete and grow. Since the publication of the skills strategy, we have put in place outcome agreements with our universities. We have rolled out all-age apprenticeships. We've launched a £12 million skill fund, which will support new skills programmes like Step Up, Scale Up and Assured Skills. And we have joined the Alliance for Lifelong Learning. The report focuses on the complexity of our skills system and the issues with cohesion and coordination that arise from that complexity. Since the skills strategy was published in March of 2022, we've been working with other departments, with our colleges and universities, with training providers and with business representatives to improve outcomes for both individuals and employers. The formal appointment of the Skills Council is a significant development in this. The Council provides an important channel for effective engagement between government, business and the education sector in relation to the development and delivery of skills policy. The Council has supported the development of the recently published Digital Skills Action Plan and is helping the Department with the collaborative development of a Green Skills Action Plan as well. The report comments on progress towards the goals of the skills strategy. The most recent statistics from NISA from October, which we forwarded to the committee, show that we are making progress towards those goals. The proportion of the workforce qualified to level 2 and above and to level 3 and above both increased substantially between 2022 and 2023. As we continue to make progress against the 2020 baseline. The proportion of narrow STEM graduates remains static, but there has been a significant increase in the number of individuals achieving narrow STEM degree qualifications in Northern Ireland, which is up by 850. While the 2023 targets or figures are encouraging, we're not at all complacent about the challenge that we face if we're going to achieve the strategic goals by 2030. It will require significant acceleration of the rate of improvement year on year compared to the past 7 years. A major theme of the Audit Office's report is the pace of change in the system. The case for systemic change in our skills systems has been set out by the OECD in their report, the skills strategy itself, and in the Lions Review Invest NI, and now, of course, in the Audit Office report. The OECD described the complexity of our system, but it noted also that skills systems of all advanced economies are inherently complex. And there are no off-the-shelf solutions waiting to be implemented. So real and sustainable transformation of a complex system like ours is going to take a bit of time. We need to get our governance arrangements right. We need to build consensus on the changes that are needed and how they will be achieved. And we need to ensure that the service we provide both to learners and to businesses is not diminished whilst the transition is taking place. This all has to be achieved within the finite resources that we've got available to the department. The Skills Action Plan that we're going to publish in the new year will set out how we will prioritise the use of our resources to achieve the greatest impact. So, in summary, I would say a lot of work has been delivered since the skills strategy was published, but we're still at the beginning of a change process and there's quite some distance to go. The Audit Office report has made a really contribution by focusing our attention at a very early stage in the strategy's life on what we need to do to ensure we successfully deliver the target and the goals of the strategy. So my colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions the committee members have about the report and the Department's response to it.
Thank you, Mr. Snowden, and thanks for keeping your introductory remarks brief. No doubt members will follow through with quite a number of questions, but I'll begin. Your department, Mr. Snowden, leads on the skills and policy and has spent almost $1 billion on skills support in the 2 years since the skills strategy launched. However, the Audit Office report shows there has been little progress towards achieving the strategic goals included in the Department's skills strategy, and extremely worryingly, business continue to report the detrimental impact skills shortages are having on their performance. This is an area of substantial spend and staff resource. For instance, in March 2024, there were 379 staff and 46 vacant posts in the Department Skills and Education Group, with salary costs in 23-24 of £14 million. As accounting officer, do you consider this value for money?
The value for money of all the programmes that we support and the schemes, the policies, the programmes that we implement in the department are all subjected to evaluation, and each one of those evaluations has showed that the individual interventions themselves deliver value for money. Now, we've also got an obligation as well to look at the programme level across the whole of the activity to assure that we are getting best value for money for the totality of the support that is delivered, not just the specific individual projects and schemes. And so that the report points out that we have not got a particular way of measuring or demonstrating that at this time. So we are developing a monitoring and evaluation framework for the skills strategy, which we will be completing and publishing at the start of next year. That will then put in place the framework by which we will be able to establish the extent to which what we're delivering is actually achieving value for money for us. In terms of the progress against the strategic goals, I did outline that we had seen some changes since 2022 figures and the most recent figures. I think that what the trends from 2017 to 2023, if those were to continue, we would fall slightly short of the targets in the skills strategy. Currently on the level 2 qualifications, the trend is an increase of 0.7% year on year on average. We need to increase that to about 1% year on year to achieve the target. So there will have to be an increase or acceleration of the work that we need to do. For the level 3 and above, we need to increase the rate of growth annually from 1.3% to 1.7%. So there is certainly quite a bit that needs to be done to get us to those targets.
How realistic is it that we achieve those targets?
Well, I think that given the encouraging figures that we've seen and the change between 2022 and 2023, there's reason to be optimistic that those targets will be achieved, but that will have to be sustained over a 6 to 7 year period to get us to the point at which we will achieve those goals.
And what particular hurdles would you see as a risk to achieving those objectives?
There are always risks in the amount of funding that's available. So I don't need to tell any of the members of the committee that the Northern Ireland Executive is in a tight financial situation and there are lots of pressures on the budget that's available. We will have to work within the allocations that we've got. We no longer have access to European Social Fund. We have been successful, and Mr Wilkinson has been in the lead in this in getting support from UK government sources, but those are not long-term guaranteed. So the access and availability of sufficient resources to invest in skills is going to be the major challenge that we'll face.
Okay. And just when you've mentioned the European Social Fund, what's the implication of losing that to this?
Previously we had funded programmes such as apprenticeships, for example, out of the European Social Fund, so now that has to be met from the department's core budget.
Okay, and is that what's putting these targets at risk then in the absence of that? Yeah.
It's a general amount of money. Yeah. I would say it's not specific changes or loss or gaining of any one particular programme. It's this total sum that's available would be the constraining factor there.
Okay, thank you. Mr Snowden, you've a strategic objective to enhance education skills and employability. Do you believe you are failing to fully achieve that objective?
Well, I think that if you look at changes that have happened over the past decade or so, you'll see there's significant improvements and changes in the levels of skills in the workforce and in the population generally. Now, that's not to say that we have gone all the distance that we could, and that we have made all the progress that we would like to see. But, for example, the Productivity Institute, an independent organisation, which is headed up by Professor David Jordan from Queen's University, noted in the most recent bulletin that Northern Ireland had made significant progress on skills. He did also say that there's quite a lot more needs to be achieved if we're going to meet the requirements of the economy.
Okay, and just another point. Who conducted the evaluations to suggest their schemes are value for money?
The details of those, Graham?
So individual programmes are evaluated within the department. So, for example, the Skill Up programme is one that we've recently completed. So we would have commissioned that. So CCEA completed an independent evaluation of that particular programme. So we do have quite a broad spectrum of programmes and projects that are part of what the department delivers. So they're all different in terms of how they are evaluated. So giving that as an example, so the Skill Up programme would have been CCEA completed that independent evaluation of whether or not it achieved its objectives.
So we do some of the evaluations ourselves, and then some of them are done by other organisations external to the department.
Okay. Do you think businesses are content with the progress that's being made?
The feedback, and we have quite a lot of engagement with businesses, is that across the board in all sectors, people are reflecting how difficult it is to get appropriately skilled staff, or indeed any staff, to take on the positions that are vacant at the minute. And that's a reflection of the strength of the economy. We were just reflecting earlier on that whenever the skills strategy was set in the first instance in 2022, one of our growth projections in terms of additional number of workers required in the economy was something like 7,000 per year. The past 2 years it's averaged 14,000. So it's an indication of the strength of the economy. It's some difficulty. Now, there are also two issues there. One is lack of people in general, and then the other is the skills of the people who are in the workforce. So I think a bigger problem is simply the lack of people. And as the number of young people leaving education starts to decline long term, that will increasingly become a pressure point in the economy. Then there are people who are seeking specific skills, and they can't get access to those. Now, so those are issues that employers are continually reflecting back to us.
Yeah, and similarly, we would pick those up quite a bit in our own relevant constituencies as well. I was just thinking through what you had said in terms of the evaluations. You know, is it best practice to really mark your own homework when it comes to?
Well, we have our analytics and services division in the department is staffed with statisticians who are actually NISRA employees and economists who work to the Department of Finance, chief economists. So they are separate from. So it's not our own staff who deliver the programmes we're evaluating. They are professional economists and statisticians.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Snowden. We will now move to Padraig Delargy. Padraig will be joining us remotely. Padraig, can you hear and see us okay?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you work away when you're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you firstly for your presentation and for coming to committee. I know I've worked with you all prior to this, and you've been very good in answering any queries that I've had, so I really appreciate that. Obviously, there have been a number of changes within the department, particularly within the last year. So I'm conscious in monitoring the progress of this. How do you think that the skills agenda and the skills piece has changed over the last year? For example, what positive strategies have you put in place to try and develop skills? But also in terms of you've mentioned, Ian, around some of the targets which you don't feel you'll meet in full. Are there any urgent actions that are being taken to get that skills strategy back on schedule and to achieve those strategic goals?
So in terms of the past year, so I am in post, it will be a year next Friday. Mrs. Doherty's been in post for 16 months now, and obviously the Minister is new, and when the executive returned at the end of January. So there has been quite a lot of change at the top of the department in that sense. So what has happened since then? The Minister came in, and Minister Murphy's got his own economic vision, which he outlined in the Assembly in February. And that is a sort of a departure from the 10X strategy, which was particularly focused on innovation, to a broader based approach relating to good jobs, productivity, regional balance and decarbonising the economy. And so then he announced in, I think it was the beginning of July, it was the skills approach that he was intending to take. And one of the major announcements there was the creation of a £12 million skills fund. That we want to then introduce a skills action plan. One of the things that myself and Mrs. Dougherty and also the Minister are very keen on is actually moving past strategy development and into delivery, and making sure that what we do is actually being effective on the ground. And in that, then the Minister has asked us to produce a skills action plan, building on what the contents of the skills strategy are, but focusing very much on what will be deliverable in the space of the current mandate. Now, we had hoped to get that out this autumn, but bearing in mind the Audit Office report came out, and the committee will want obviously to have their input, that we have decided to allow this process to complete and then produce the skills action plan. We're able to take account of the committee's recommendations. And then in terms of just your final point was then about not meeting the targets. I wouldn't want the people to take the impression about that we think we're not going to meet the targets. We're very much focused on making sure that we will. It is just they are challenging targets. And quite rightly ambitious. That we need to make a step change in the delivery of skills in Northern Ireland to be able to meet the agenda that we need for the growth of the economy. The actions that we're taking include things I've just mentioned there, like the skills plan, and we're looking at new programmes that are delivered, and some of them have been quite successful, very positive evaluations. In addition, I think a very positive development, and I mentioned it in the opening statement, is the creation of the Northern Ireland Skills Council, which I think will help us very significantly get buy-in from across all the stakeholders in business and trade unions and academia and delivery agencies to make sure that what we put in place is as effective as it can be. And we've already seen the fruits of that in the Digital Skills Action Plan and in the Green Skills Action Plan, which will be shortly produced.
Patrick?
Okay, thank you. So just around the skills strategy, there are 50 recommendations and actions to support achieving those strategic goals. Do you think that 50 is too many? Is that unmanageable?
There are quite a number of things need to be done to make some of the changes that we need to see in the skills agenda. I think certainly there's a risk that when you produce a strategy with that number of recommendations, then the focus can be lost. Now, I haven't said that a number of these things have already been delivered, and we are in an 8-year strategy, so I think at this point we're around about 30 of the recommendations have been completed or achieved out of the 50. A couple of them will not be possible to achieve, and so we've already accepted that, but we're continuing to work on the others, all of which will need to be taken forward in any event if we're going to make the progress we want to see.
Okay, thank you. So, look, you've mainly answered my next point, which was around monitoring progress and the timeline around that. But specifically, how do you measure progress?
Well, we have the targets, of course, that are in the strategy. Those are monitored by reference to statistics produced by the Northern Ireland Statistics Research Agency, but also then the Higher Education Statistics Authority in relation to the STEM subjects. We have I've already mentioned the Analytical Services Department or Division in the department, and they are a very effective organisation, produce a lot of very high quality analysis which we use, which assists us then with monitoring how we're progressing. So in addition to those 3 strategic goals, then we have a raft of other statistical information which we use to monitor progress in terms of things like completion rates in particular programmes and schemes and training initiatives, things like participant uptake and so forth. And then we get the employer skills survey, which also gives us useful information from the market about what is required.
Okay, I just want to probe that point a wee bit more. So you've mentioned about how it's measured, but are those measured at the end of each project or at the end of each process, or are they continually measured throughout? And if so, what are the intervals?
At the overall level of the department's total activity, then we rely on official statistics which are produced on an annual recurring basis, but there is a time lag with some of those statistics. Then we also have access to information which is in relation to individual schemes or training schemes, and you would get that information at various stages during the life of a project. So it doesn't have to depend until the end, although we want to do a proper evaluation at the end. Then we also have information that we get from training providers and others, which we can use on a more real-time basis to help manage the interventions that we deliver.
It's the real-time one that I'm particularly interested in terms of how you change and how you continuously update and review. So could you give me a wee bit more detail on that, please?
So this might be in relation to the delivery of a particular scheme, for example. If so, in the audit officer's report, they make reference, for example, to one of the programs in which there were very few completions of the initiative. So that was like a particular strand of the Scale Up program, which has actually been overall incredibly successful and has a very positive evaluation. But in that particular intervention, the nature of it, which was designed to be micro credits, micro modules which you could do online, what we found was that people were completing the modules online, but they didn't then go on and complete the qualification piece at the end of it. So as a consequence, we have adjusted how those kinds of online courses are delivered in order to make sure we get a better output. So that has been fed back into the operation of the programme as it proceeds.
Okay, thank you. Look, just a final point from myself, and it's on the SMEs. I know Daniel has touched on this as well. One of the key issues which we find, and this is on a constituency basis, but I know other colleagues find similar, is that people find it very difficult to get apprenticeships, which is obviously going to be a key driver in skills. There are a lot of barriers around that. A lot of them are paperwork. A lot of them are kind of bureaucratic. For example, a lot of apprenticeships in Derry, a lot of apprentices have spoken very highly of the work that Northwest Regional College and other colleges do, the relationships with industry that they have. But the barrier to a lot of those SMEs, in particular smaller businesses, maybe who employ 2, 3, 4 people, taking on apprenticeships, are around the paperwork and insurance as well. So could you maybe give me a bit more detail on how you plan to change that? Any processes which you're going to put in place to streamline that and encourage smaller businesses to be able to take on apprentices?
Well, one of the risks if you're a small business, I suppose, and you're taking on an apprenticeship, the apprenticeship lasts 2 to 3 years, depending on the level at which the apprenticeship is undertaken. And if you're a small business and you can't have any assurity that you're going to be in a position to be able to fund that particular position in your business for 2 or 3 years, it'll be a barrier. So one of the things we're looking at is whether we can make the apprenticeships a bit more portable for the individual concerned. That then reduces the risk to both the individual and to the business. We have been talking internally in response to the audit office report about how we need to then start to think about, because of the complexity of the system and it's very difficult to navigate, how we need to start to make that easier for the people who use it, so that you can understand how to get into the system, how to progress through it, and that those processes are as far as possible made straightforward and intuitive to operate. So we will be wanting to do quite a bit of work around, not just in apprenticeships, but all kinds of other schemes, FE access, HE access, and so forth, to make sure that those pathways are as obvious and clear as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if I may, just in terms of, I mean, you make a good point. A lot of our businesses here are small businesses, and they really struggle to interface with the skills landscape. One of the successes that we've had is the mega network sort of around Mid-Ulster, which works really well, which was initially funded by Invest and I think that's part of the solution going forward, is those collaborative networks and helping employers to engage not just on apprenticeships, but actually all of the skills provision that we currently have. I think the provision that we have is good, but the interface, particularly micro businesses, they really struggle to understand that. So I think there is a good model around the likes of the mega network that they have around Mid-Ulster, and if that's something that we could explore to see if we can roll that out further. I know Invest and I have put additional funding into those collaborative networks, and I think that is a really positive thing, just given the the complexities that we have in our economy here tends to be dominated by those micro businesses. So we do need to change our approach and to help to support those businesses through that type of approach. I think has been a real positive.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I suppose it's just the insurance piece in particular, which we're hearing time and time again as a key barrier. So it's how that specific point is addressed. But as you say, 90% of our businesses here, over 90%, I think, SMEs. So it's really, if we're going to tackle getting more apprentices and then tackle skills, to me, that's the key piece in future planning. Thanks very much for your answers. They've been really comprehensive.
Just before I let Myra in, Colin Gildernew has a bit of a supplementary.
Yeah, just in relation to follow up to that mega issue, and I raised that previously here as well, and I know them really well. I come from an engineering background myself, so I understand the worth of it. You've mentioned there, Graham, about expanding that type of model. Can we also expect to see that type of model being hardwired into the landscape so that they, first of all, have the due influence and input that they deserve, and also that they're getting resourced and recognised in that sense?
Well, that's why I mentioned the Invest in I investment. I think it's £16 million that they're investing in those collaborative networks. I mentioned Mega as the one that's closest to me, but actually those networks are available right across Northern Ireland, so they are there, and it is something, and it is an approach that has worked in the past, and it's something that we really want to build on. And I think looking at the Skills Council and their interface with that wider network is really important. And also we have things like labour market partnerships, which also bring a focus on what local areas need. So it isn't just a one-size-fits-all. We need to make sure that what is being delivered in local areas meets the needs of those local industries. So there is quite a lot of that collaboration that goes on a daily basis, and is, and from my perspective, very effective.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Myra.
Yeah, so just to add to what Ian was saying, so it's a really good juncture in terms of the apprenticeships, because we're working on the next iteration. So this feedback is really, really helpful. So we're looking to, as you would imagine, take things on, improve them, evolve them. And in terms of apprenticeships, for those that were around at the time when apprenticeships started here, the content was procured from England. So it was just a lift and shift from England. And where we are now is that we have 19 sectoral partnerships to co-design the content of those apprenticeship frameworks. And what we're now thinking about is, for this next level, how do we make those sectoral partnerships even more effective and engaged? But I think the point that you make, so two things, which is, who's round the table, who's not round the table, how do we make sure that the nature of the economy that we have with that dominance around micro and small businesses, how do we make sure that those businesses are supported to access these apprenticeships, which are so important for the economy? But also I think that's a really important point that you're making around bureaucracy and making sure that the routes into this are as streamlined as possible. So that's definitely something that we can take on board.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. And I know that you've already been doing a large piece of work around that, but definitely it's something I'm keen to work with you all on in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Padraig, and thank you for that. We'll move to Cheryl Brownlee, the Deputy Chair of the committee. Okay, Cheryl.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for your answers so far. I just want to touch on barriers to employment and skills, and something that has greatly concerned me is the increase of special educational needs and disabilities. And it is touched on within your report about there needs to be greater equality in our labour market, and there is a persistent gap between people with and without disabilities. So my question would be, what exactly is the department doing to decrease that gap?
Yeah, so in my opening remarks I mentioned that the skills agenda is very important, not just for the economic reasons but also for social inclusion reasons, and in order to help people get into appropriate employment, then we need to equip them with the necessary skills. Now, in the past year in the department, we have been looking very closely at this issue of young people leaving formal education who have special educational needs and then moving on into education and training. We're seeing quite a large number coming through from schools into further education colleges, for example, with additional needs, much more than have been in previous years. But then there's also a group for which there's no suitable provision at all. So the department has developed and submitted a bid for transformation funding to actually put in place a scheme which will allow us to support people. It won't be suitable for everybody in those conditions, because those with very complex needs, they need something different from an education or training perspective, but they do need to have we do need to have something in place for those who have the potential to actually have productive careers and work lives going forward. The Skill Up programme I mentioned earlier is also useful in this, because a lot of it is delivered online. We've got a large take up of people from different backgrounds. In fact, it's not your typical learner profile. More people over age 35, more people from rural areas, more people with disabilities participate in that than in more traditional training programmes, and that's been very successful in terms of inclusion. And then I also mentioned in my opening remarks the Step Up programme. So we were at an event in Newton Abbey College at the start of last week in relation to the Step Up programme, where we were talking to some of the participants in that scheme, and a number of those were people who had disabilities. I was talking to one young man with a brain injury, an acquired brain injury. The Step Up programme has been crucial for helping him get back into a training process. There were young people there who had accidents of various kinds at early stages in their lives, and their hoped for careers had been sort of denied to them as a result of that, because of the physical impacts of the injuries. And that programme was basically a life changer for them, allowed them to get back into learning, and therefore have a career path that is realistic for them to achieve. So we need to, in designing skills programs and interventions, make sure that they are capable of accommodating people with those particular kinds of needs. There is more we could do in working with the Department for Education, I think, especially around having a better insight into the flow of people with special educational needs or additional needs coming out of the school system. So there's a lot of data which we could work with the Department of Education. And so the appointment of the Chief Scientific and Technical Advisor earlier in the year, who is in part paid for by my department. We've been talking to her about use of data and AI, and those are avenues we want to explore to see how we can actually gather and analyse the information that isn't available in the schools system to be able to help us plan for the arrival of people with particular needs in the further education or higher education system, and that would certainly help the experience of the young people involved.
Thank you, and that's what I was actually going to ask in terms of that data. Is communication ongoing between departments, between education, between communities, so you know exactly what is going to be coming next? How do you provide for people better and plan forward? Also within the report, it just touched on the disability employment strategy that I think the Department of Communities was leading on, but other departments were feeding into. Do you have any update on that, of the progress?
Yeah, so I sit on the board that looks after the disability employment strategy, and we've had a workshop looking at what are the types of interventions that need to be put into that strategy going forward. So that is a good example of cross-departmental working. We work very closely with the Department for Communities in terms of the different interventions. One of the programmes that we delivered was a £40 million package that included the Step Up programme that Ian has just mentioned, but it also included Job Start as well as working very closely with Invest NI. And I think it is that collaborative working between departments that I've seen a real shift in actually that close working to ensuring that we are delivering the right things that are meeting the needs of individuals. But also at that strategic level, one of the first things that we did in implementing the strategy was to establish the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion subgroup, which is currently chaired by Caroline van der Vels. That's a really important group to better understand what are the needs of those individuals that maybe have barriers from disabilities. We have women returners, we have carers. So we've looked in detail in terms of what those needs are, and we have designed our interventions to ensure that we're meeting those barriers. And Ian talked about the Step Up event, which was really a useful process to better understand how it is actually helping those individuals to address those barriers. One of the things that came out of that process was actually the importance of mentoring. So individuals needed that mentoring support, taking them through the skills. So it isn't just about putting on a course, it's about guiding individuals through that course to make sure that they get the best outcome that is possible. One of the things that we are keen to do is to work with employers in that as well. So it isn't just about providing the skills to do the job. We have to make sure that employers make the job opportunities as flexible as possible, so that mentoring support isn't just for the skills provision, that actually translates into employment opportunities as well. And I'm seeing a real shift in employers' attitudes and behaviours, that they're much more open to being flexible and better understanding the needs of those individuals. Because as Ian said in his introductory comments, I mean, we are at full employment. So if we really want to continue on with that economic growth, we have to change the behaviours. It isn't about 9 to 5 at the desk. It's actually being much more flexible and changing how we do work. But I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing coming from employers so far.
Thank you. And just very quickly, are you communicating directly with people with disabilities and their families to get that lived experience? As you've touched on, barriers are a significant challenge for people, but it's listening to people, why they're struggling, why they can't get into employment or skill or continue in that. So it's that lived voice that is so important in this.
Yeah, I mean, as Ian said, we had a session where all of the senior management team attended a Step Up event, and I think that was really illuminating. We as a senior team then were able to get a feel as to what are the barriers and how this is helping. And as I say, it really came across really strongly that mentoring support in those programs is critically important. So it helps us to better understand what works and what doesn't work. It's very difficult to design programs sitting in the office. I think your point that you make is essential, is that we understand how it works, what works well, and maybe even what doesn't work so well. So that I can give you that assurance that engagement is happening on a very regular basis, and we work very closely with our colleges as well, who deliver many of our programs very successfully.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
You've said that you're keen to work with employers. What structures are in place presently to ensure that happens?
So we have the Skills Council, and there are 6 representatives, appointed representatives on the Skills Council from business backgrounds, also the Northern Ireland Business Alliance. And we expect, as part of the terms of reference for the Skills Council, the members who take on those roles are expected to build and maintain and use networks in their own particular sectors to help us get engagement with the businesses in those sectors. Then we have and Moira mentioned them, the sectoral partnerships. That's a very important vehicle through which we will engage with different employers groups in order to talk about what they can do to help deliver them the skills agenda. And then we have frequent meetings with sectoral representative bodies from different organisations.
And are you certain all sectors are covered, represented on that Skills Council?
Well, you would have to have a council of hundreds of members if you were going to cover absolutely every sector, but it is fairly broad based, and it is linked into those sectors which have the highest growth potential in the economy.
Covered in terms of demand, I meant, generally from your employers.
From employers. They cover the majority of it. I wouldn't say they cover 100% because I don't think that would actually ever be possible.
I think that is an important point for us to consider, because obviously, we need to keep things manageable, and it's back to that point about who do you have around the table, but what then are the other mechanisms for making sure that those that are around that table are taking the message out and making those connections. So quite recently we launched our business plan, and we had an event with the business community, and certainly even if I think about the Skills Council, we had an approach from the hospitality sector, because they were conscious that they didn't have a voice. So we had that engagement with them to see how do we make sure that we're continuing to broaden that out and make sure that all of those perspectives are being brought forward.
So in terms of ensuring that this perspectives are being brought forward, how often does the Skills Council meet?
Once,
4 times a year.
4 times a year.
You think that's sufficient?
I mean, those are the standing meetings that the Skills Council has, but actually there are a number of subgroups that actually sit beneath the Skills Council. So we have the Equality and Diversity and Inclusion group that I mentioned. We did have a digital skills group, a green skills group, a group on labour mobility, and most recently a group on skills and education. So what happens is there's a lot of work happens in those subgroups between meetings. So that's where the work actually happens, and there's a lot of work happens in the intervening period between those Skills Council meetings. So it's the work that happens between the meetings, that's where the most important piece happens.
Okay. Just to touch on something, Ian, that you had mentioned before I move on, you said you'd be keen to work. More work needs to be done with the Department of Education, basically, and one of the key criticisms of departments here is the silo working of departments. So, how do you plan to take that forward in the long term?
Well, we have, because of our focus now on delivery and actual practical implementation of effective interventions, we have working partnerships on specific projects with every single other department. And we can talk for a long time, if you like, about the specific individual cases. Sure. So, for example, this is just like a worked example. We had a project with the Western Health Trust in relation to their skills shortages and demands, and they had a very high dependency on agency and bank nurses, and in the course and other staff. And in the course of developing this project and implementing it, now their reliance on that has very substantially increased because we are seeing the pipeline of suitably qualified people coming into the organisation. So we have projects like that in operation with almost every other department. What we don't find is any reluctance to joint working. We have a specific problem which requires a solution that 2 or more departments or other organisations need to work on. There's no resistance to that at all.
Okay. Final point for me before I move on to Anne Forsyth, and it's just following on from Padraig Delargy's line of questioning. And you might have said it, I might have missed it, but why did the department not publish the second annual monitoring report?
So the minister came in to the department early part of the year. He had his agenda that he wanted to see delivered. So he had, once the report was received, he had determined that he wanted to move ahead with his announcement in the Assembly on the skills agenda. So he determined that he didn't want that report to be published, although we have shared it with the Economy Committee and with the committee here, and it is taken into account in the development of the skills agenda. But he wanted to have a focus on what his agenda and his action plan was going to be going forward.
Was that draft paused or scrapped?
No, it isn't either. It was final draft, so it is a report of the council's agreed.
Okay, thank you. Anne Forsyth.
Thanks very much, and thanks to you all for coming here today. I welcome your commitment to seeing outcomes moving forward in terms of the skills, but Ian, you also noted the extreme financial pressures that we're in here in Northern Ireland, with almost £1 billion spent on skills in the past 2 years. It's obviously a very significant area of spend, but my questions are around the fact that this significant spend does not have a clear reportable impact, and the links to the skills strategy aren't entirely clear. So as you've mentioned, there are a lot of schemes, there's a lot of things happening on the ground with the further education colleges, universities and the department, but I just want to know, how does the department bring all of that together to ensure that they're equipping people with the right skills to contribute towards the achievement of the strategy goals?
So the overall budget for skills and education, it makes up about 73% of the department's total expenditure. So it is, by some distance, the most significant expenditure priority that we have. Now that includes all of the funding for our higher education institutions, the universities, Stranmillis and St Mary's University colleges. It includes all the funding for our FE colleges and maintaining that whole sector. As well as all of the apprenticeships and all the other skills programs that we have. Now, the complexity of the portfolio of interventions that we make indicates that that we are focusing on the things that we think need to be delivered. So traditionally, you would have universities and further education colleges. But because that does not meet the needs of every learner in the economy, then you need to then start to add in additional things. So that's where the apprenticeship schemes come in, that's where the additional skills schemes, and we've already talked about things like Skill Up and Step Up, which are particular schemes which we need to put in place to fill the gaps that the traditional mainstream provision is unable to meet. So the overall budget is constructed in the way that it is as a reflection of the fact that we are endeavouring to put in place interventions that will actually take us towards achieving those targets.
So you mentioned that, you know, all the colleges, the significant part of the budget that it is for the department, all of the things going on. I just wonder if you could clarify, have you made any significant changes to how those colleges operate and the programmes that are being run in order to feed into the delivery of these strategic goals, or has it just continued as business as usual under a new strategy?
The colleges produce development plans on an annual basis in which they set out what it is that they propose to deliver during the course of the coming academic years. So we engage with the colleges on the content of those development plans. And recently, since the skills strategy has been published, we've been taking a much more close look at the content of those development plans, and then are pressing the colleges on the skills programmes that they deliver. Now, we also have to then respond to the demand that there is from young people and other learners who want to take up courses, but that is the mechanism by which we work with the colleges to help direct the delivery in the system.
The development plans were already in place, and then the strategy came in for its purpose, but you are using the strategy to work with the existing development plans, or have there been any changes to significant programmes?
They are
in line
annually
with this new
renewed
strategy?
and updated, so we negotiate these development plans with the colleges. Then,
do you tell me any significant changes that there have been in any particular programmes that bring it in
maybe
line
more,
with these
can you?
strategic goals?
So the college development plans for this year have been worked through at the minute, and we have a strategic planning day with all 6 of the colleges the first week in December. And the purpose of that is to have a deep dive around where the minister has set his priorities, and how then those development plans might need to flex in order to meet that. So already, I think what we've seen, and the colleges, and Padraig was saying earlier, you know, our colleges, all of you will know from your constituencies about the excellent work that's done at the sub-regional level by all of the colleges. The benefit, I think, of having that time together as a sectoral group and with the senior team within the department is to look to see what changes could be made and what further benefit could come, particularly at that sectoral level. Back to that point about collaboration and sharing, because undoubtedly there's great scope for the colleges to build on the collaboration that they already do, and to take that to the next level. So we've a dedicated day the first week in December looking at those very plans.
Okay, you're probably looking for more specifics.
Yeah,
okay, so here's an example. We have 7 sectoral action plans for high growth potential sectors of the economy. They were published in the late spring. And so, for example, one of those sectors is the screen industries. So we had been pressing some of the colleges to look at what they could do for screen industries. Unfortunately, in some of the colleges, they found there's very low uptake, and those schemes then have to be, that provision has to be withdrawn because there simply isn't a demand in the market for it there. But that's an indication of the kinds of things that we have to do then to push the colleges, and we ask them to get involved in putting things in place. And where the colleges have facilities, or they have actual buildings which are relatively close to each other, for example, in the South Eastern College in Belfast, we make sure that they aren't duplicating provision in quite adjacent colleges. That makes the system more efficient. Graham maybe can come in with some additional.
Just from my perspective, I think there's been a fundamental shift, particularly in the delivery of the FE sector. One of the most significant changes driven by the strategy was the introduction of all-age apprenticeships. Again, that is providing more opportunities for more people, so that is a significant change. I also think that we have widened the opportunity through programmes like Skill Up, and as he has said, 70% of those individuals are outside the Greater Belfast area, so individuals who wouldn't ordinarily have accessed learning in the past now have the opportunity to do that. So I think the move to online provision has been a fundamental shift in terms of that delivery, and has provided much more opportunity. What we find in terms of accessing skills, it is time and cost are the 2 most significant barriers. So those are the things that we've tried to address is taking the cost out of it for the individuals, making the provision free, but making sure that that provision is economically relevant and has the opportunity to maybe get somebody into a different job or to get a promotion in the job that they have. So I've seen a real shift in the delivery in terms of that online piece, part-time provision, and even our Assured Skills Academies, which had been hugely successful in the past. We're now delivering those on a part-time basis. We're using online delivery. So there is a real shift in the delivery model, and I want to pay credit to the FE colleges for being very agile and responsive and actually making that shift to a new delivery model. I think it's real positive.
Thank you. And, listen, Ian, we all know ourselves in our own constituencies, there's a really broad array of courses that are available. But, just to bring it into the specifics and the skills shortages and things that we have here, and I'm listening to you all, and there's obviously an awful lot of engagement and things going on. I wonder, looking at all of that, do you feel the department might be spreading itself too thin to be able to see meaningful impact on very specific skills shortages that we have here in Northern Ireland?
The Audit Office report has a figure in there for skills-related shortages, employment shortages of around 14,000. I don't think that we would ever be in a position to put in place provision which would produce the skills which would fill all 14,000 of those jobs. That's not ever going to be possible, and wouldn't potentially be that wise either, because some of those skills shortage vacancies will be in sectors of the economy which are less productive or less growth oriented. So we have got those 4 sectoral action plans. Each one of them includes reference to skills related issues, generally speaking, pipeline of people coming into coming in a particular industry, or retention of people in that industry, or upskilling people, and issues around inclusion and getting a wider range of people willing to consider a career in that industry. So those are the things that we would be given some focus to, and certainly looking at those growth areas in the economy. Having said that, we've got to make sure we maintain like a broad-based economy as well. It is not simply picking half a dozen or 10 particularly favoured sectors and then pursuing them at the expense of everything else. There are lots of components which make a healthily functioning economy, and we've got to make sure we maintain that within the scope of a very limited labour supply, fewer people coming out of education because of demographic changes, and growth in the economy, which is fueling demand for more labour.
And what's your opinion as to offering a number of these programmes on a smaller scale, and how that feeds into a potential of not actually achieving any substantial change? Do you think that there's anywhere that you're seeing substantial change coming through, or will do in the short term? Okay,
so I'll use the example of the screen industry, for example. So about 10 to 15 years ago, before Game of Thrones was filmed here, there was virtually no screen industry worth mentioning. In the early days of the growth of the industry here, virtually all the technicians and the crew were imported into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. As things stand now, the production crews for large productions are typically around 2/3 local people. So there's an example of where we have certainly increased very substantially the proportion of people being trained in that particular industry. Great benefit to Northern Ireland. Richard Williams was at an event yesterday who is claiming that the value of it to the economy is now approaching £1 billion per year, so very significant. The other where that's happened would be the financial technology sector and cybersecurity. Again, 15 years ago, very small industry in Northern Ireland. Now we are the world's top location for financial technology inward investment. And that again has been built on the back of around 5,000 people per year who have got some kind of qualification or training in a finance and technology related discipline, which will then make them suitable for employment in that sector.
It's good to see those examples coming through, and obviously the department has access to a large range of data coming from a number of different fields, and I was just wondering how you currently use that data to actively engage and integrate the identified needs back into the provision, and how reactive you are to that.
I mentioned a couple of times now our Analytics and Statistics Division, and they do quite a lot of that work for us on our behalf. I think I also mentioned the Chief Scientific and Technical Advisor and our discussions with her around the potential to use data and AI much more effectively. This is the beginning of a significant change in the way a lot of data is used. I think it's one of those areas in the department we would certainly want to see what we can do with all of that. Sometimes the problem is there's just simply too much information, too much data available, quantitative and qualitative both, and we need to find a way of harnessing the technology to be able to, I think, get proper analysis of that, because it can be overwhelming with just the sheer volume of it.
So your data analytics team, so I'm presuming they're looking at, a whole range of surveys and, picking things up from lots of different means. Who's setting the direction for them as to which data it is that they're analysing? And then what's the process for where that analysis goes, and what level is it going through the organisation, and what is the process there? I'm just wanting to know what they're looking at, who's deciding that's the right thing to look at, and then what the process is as to how the data is used.
So there are some official statistics and national statistics which are produced for whole of Northern Ireland, or indeed feed into whole of UK statistical publications. So those would be routine and regularly replicated. Then we also have other surveys which are undertaken: employer skills survey, the skills barometer, various other pieces of work which are done for us by the team. So the way that the system works is on an annual basis we look at a research agenda for the department, and then we see what kind of information do we need to help us address particular policy questions. The analytics and research team then will pick that up, and they will deliver that work for us, and then they'll produce information. It goes back into the policy teams like Maura and Graham's, who will look at that information and then feed that into the policy development process. Similarly, they will also produce information on evaluation of programmes, and that again goes into the business areas, and then we refresh that agenda every year.
Just maybe give you a practical example of that. So whenever we were developing the business case for the Skill Up programme, for example, we used a lot of that data to identify which courses that we were going to fund. So we have 300 courses, and the types of things that we identified as part of that analysis were digital skills, incredibly important going forward across all sectors. So that's heavily, you'll see it heavily referenced in the courses that we have. Leadership and management, again, if we want to enhance productivity, that's an important piece of that too. And also green skills is an important part of our provision through the Skill Up programme. But also looking at the Minister's economic vision, we looked at the 4 areas that he wants to develop, and making sure that there's alignment between the courses that we have identified and making sure that they link back to the Minister's economic vision. So whenever we're developing our business case, it's looking at the Minister's priorities, looking at the evidence that is produced, and then putting that into a business case to ensuring that the outcomes that we are going to deliver through those are going to match with the analysis and the Minister's vision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, David Honeyford.
Okay, thank you all three. I'm going to swap around just to follow on from Dan what I was going to ask you. So I'm going to, so just looking at those courses in the FE, or the spend on FE and in universities, what we're seeing, or what we see as a chart, is of degrees being social sciences. There's too many of what the industry needs. Teaching was another one that was quite high from memory. But then when we flip and we go to sciences and engineering and stuff, there isn't enough supply there. So what are the department doing to strategically align the provision for what is needed?
The we provide quite a lot of funding every year to the universities, and so we have introduced outcome agreements with the universities where we try to set out in quite a lot of detail what we are asking the universities to deliver for us in terms of educational and other outcomes in return for the substantial amount of funding.
When did that happen?
I'm sorry?
When did that happen?
When did that happen? So we signed the first of those earlier this year.
So that will change from here on going forward, that we won't see then?
Well, I have to bear in mind that we live in a society in which people are free to choose the courses of study that they want to choose, and the universities are autonomous organisations. So I don't have or the Minister doesn't have legal authority to direct universities to only provide certain kinds of courses, and I can't make young people, whenever they leave A-levels, choose to study particular courses. And what we can do is put the support mechanisms and the pathways in place, which might then help encourage people who wouldn't otherwise think of going into, for example, STEM subjects, to choose those. But that's a process that needs to start in secondary school. So the career service has definitely got a role to play in that, and they're quite active in that space. But a young person at 18 cannot choose to go in to study a science degree or an engineering degree if they don't have science related A-levels and GCSEs.
What work's been done between the department and the Department of Education to make sure that is now stopping, and that we have early on that kids are keeping the subjects that we actually need rather than the subjects that the schools want?
I think that's a really important area for us to continue to develop. So thinking about something actually quite recently, so our career service, and back to Ian's point that it's about providing the advice and guidance and support, but ultimately it's for individuals to make those choices. And we've got really positive feedback within our career service. We have a team that looks after bulletins for sectors and occupations, and they've just produced one on women in STEM that has got really positive feedback, both from the sector but also from within schools. What we're seeing really around those choices, particularly for STEM for girls and young women, is that it needs to be hardwired in those options, and that way of thinking about themselves and the world needs to be coming in primary school. So the career service and the Education Authority had run a pilot. The funding came through Fair Start, looking at particularly young primary school children drawing their future and thinking about the kind of jobs and occupations that they might have. And what that's made really clear is while careers advice happens in the post-primary setting, we do need to build on that, the engagement that we've begun with colleagues in education. We need to be beginning that at the primary level if we're going to create the pipeline to come through. So I think that's absolutely correct to identify that as an issue for development.
Going to the other end of the educational journey then, in postgraduate awards, the department provides substantial sums of money for PhD research in Northern Ireland. So we fund 729 PhD places on an annual basis. Now, so far, around 63% of those PhDs are in STEM related subjects. What we have started and signed off last month, a pilot project to look at a more directive approach to PhD funding for an additional 51 places, which would then test the extent to which it is possible for us to use that funding and the way we approach it to direct the subjects of the PhD research into areas that would be more aligned with the economic vision and the programme for government's requirements, and that would involve, by necessity, more STEM-related subjects.
Just want to step back. You said there's agreement between yourself and the universities, and that's now a change of moving forward. So it would have been before or after this report was done. If you can't control the university, and I appreciate their autonomous, I understand that. What's the point of that agreement?
Well, it's an agreement.
For what?
In return for the money, we want to see certain policy outcomes coming from that. And the consequence then we negotiate with the university about what they will deliver, and it's not simply in terms of the subject and educational outcomes, but it's things like widening participation to include more disadvantaged groups of people who wouldn't traditionally have been in university education, more what they will do in the space of research, for example. It's very important that we have very strong research institutions, and we do. We're lucky we have those two in Northern Ireland, but it's in those areas, so it's a very broad-ranging agreement. It covers a lot of what the universities do, but that also will include a lot of the policy outcomes we're looking to achieve. Just to clarify, and then I'll go back, but just to clarify, you're not controlling or trying to control what subjects you're directing them to do, so that's still free for the university to continue to produce students without filling the skills for the jobs we need? Well, the universities will also respond to the demand from young people for the kinds of courses that they would like to see delivered. So whenever I was at Queen's, for example, I think it was one of the last universities to still study Byzantine studies, for example. I mean, that's not a demand for that anymore, it's gone. So the universities will respond to what people are
So
looking
we're
for.
funding what people want rather than what the economy needs.
Well, they are autonomous institutions, and people are free in our society to choose what they want to study. And otherwise, if we take that to the next stage then, so if the department was to say to them, you cannot any longer provide degree courses in a particular set of subjects, that would be a hugely politically contentious step for the department to take, and we would need to then, I can imagine that it would not be something that would...
How do you incentivise a particular course that we need more people to be doing, is probably the question David's trying to get to.
Well, then that's, and Maura's talked about some of this, about how far back you would need to start to be able to get people coming in and considering those, especially in areas, for example, like STEM subjects, which women have traditionally been less likely to take part in. So there's a lot of stuff in there about encouraging people to consider options which they previously wouldn't have done. So whenever I was young, my father had an idea that I should be a lawyer, I'd be a solicitor. So I chose subjects at A level which were appropriate to study law at Queen's. I ended up not studying law. As it happened, my wife's an English teacher, yet my two sons have both done STEM subjects. One's
It's the same and ended up as a politician.
Yeah.
So both your fathers are probably disappointed.
Well,
Can I make a small point?
Chairman.
Can I make a small point?
Goes without saying.
So you're right, you cannot force or coerce, but you can persuade, and a lot of that's around how you value. So until we get a situation where the young person in a boiler suit is as valued as the young person in a graduation gown, and you can do something with that. The other thing is, just let me finish, colleges will tell us they don't get a fair crack of the whip in terms of getting in front of those young children when they're making those decisions. So you could open up the schools to allow the colleges to come in to explain other pathways which might link to what industry needs and open there. So what are you doing in that respect?
Okay, so one of the most successful things recently has been higher level apprenticeships, and that has seen quite a number of people choosing to go down that more vocational route rather than take up a university course. So it is an entirely, I think the evidence would show, valued alternative, an increasingly valued alternative to university education, particularly given the cost, of tuition fees and so forth. So you will see an awful lot of people now picking up. I think the last figures I saw 2,500 higher level apprenticeships currently in Northern Ireland. So that's been one very positive thing that we have done. Maura mentioned the career service. Again, we are encouraging people in the career service when they're engaged with young people in schools to consider the options that are available at courses. Now, again, young people are free to choose to study. Parents have got choice about which school they can send children to. All of those things are in the mix. Whenever I was in a previous job, and it was somebody told me that the thing about marketing and persuading people to do stuff, the acronym's AIDA. So you need awareness, you need interest, you need awareness, information, decision, and action. So the first thing is make people aware of the availability. You've got to give them suitable information, and you've got to facilitate them making the decision you want them to take. Those are the three things that we've got to focus on. So we are making the opportunities available. We are helping them people see what those opportunities are, and certainly we hope that they will make decisions which will then start to reflect the direction we would like to see the skills going.
Thank you. David, briefly, and then just after David, I'm changing the running order slightly due to a bit of a change of the thing. So after David, we'll be going back to Cheryl, or Colin Crawford, and then Cheryl, and then back to Colin. Okay?
I'll just go and step back. The skills shortage vacancies are about 5 times greater now than they were, from between 2015 and 2022. Can you explain that?
I think in the figures from 2022, there's almost certainly a very significant COVID impact from that. So you recall that there was quite a lot of people, they were laid off. So the increase in universal credit claimants, for example, was quite significant, as businesses at the start of the pandemic didn't know what was going to happen. I recall at the time a lot of the conversation was around economic scarring and long-term unemployment being the big risks that the pandemic posed to us. Now, it hasn't turned out to be that. So in 2020, whenever the economy was reopening, there was just basically an explosion of employers looking for employees. At which point some people had left the labour market because they had chosen to retire early, for example, or had made different choices on the back of their experiences of the pandemic and then their issues around long-term sickness. So what we have seen then, because of that COVID impact, is a very significant and very rapid rise in the number of vacancies in the economy and then the number of those which are related to absence of skills.
Okay. What are the department doing to address that?
Well, all of the things we've been talking about, I think, essentially. But if we have a very rapidly growing economy, which we currently do, a rapid growth in employment, now well over 800,000 employee jobs in Northern Ireland, we have got to work with the employers to make sure that the pipeline of people is coming through. I think the most significant thing that we need to really focus our attention on now is a number of economically inactive people in the economy. There are four main groups to that. There are students and others undergoing training. There are people taking care of the home or dependents. There are long-term sick and they're early retired. So you would hope that the people in education and employment will come through into the labour market. After they completed their course of study. The early retired are unlikely to want to come back in. They've made a decision to retire. What you then are left with the long-term sick and disabled and the people who are currently looking after after dependents or looking after the home. The people looking after dependents or looking after the home need flexible options. So recently we were having discussions, I was talking to Moira about this, about a particular employer who has found it very difficult to fill logistics management posts. And is interested in starting to have a look at part-time apprenticeships and part-time training opportunities in order to fit around the needs of people who otherwise have caring opportunities. And so we need to be engaging with employers about whether those the automatic thing to go to a full-time 5-day-a-week post, are there other options that would work equally well for them? So those are some of the things we can do for the disabled people. I think one of the previous questions was about what we were doing to support disabled people back into work, people on long-term sick. So this is where we're working with the Department for Communities, the Disabled Employment Strategy, to make sure that we're helping those people get back into employment. Those two groups, the last data that I saw from survey data, so it's not an exact figure, but it's extrapolated from the results of the survey, suggests that it might be somewhere in the region of about 20,000 people in those two groups who we could get back into work if we had the appropriate provision.
Sir David would be keen to hear that. Just in relation to some of the other, no, well, I'll move on actually, I'll just, because I'm conscious of time. Colin Crawford, come in first and then Cheryl.
Thanks, Chair, and can I thank the panel for their answers this afternoon. The education and training for 14 to 19-year-olds is an area where there is clear need and ministerial agreement for departments to work together and deliver better outcomes for children and young people. Yet there have been significant issues in the governance and implementation of the framework to transform 14 to 19 education and training provision, including unclear objectives. How can there be a lack of clarity in the objectives, and why has there been a failure to successfully implement the framework?
I'm going to pass this over to Moira because she's the SRO for that particular framework and she's on the lead on it, so you have the full.
No, so completely agree, it's absolutely critical. One of the things when we looked at that framework, there's a huge amount in there which reflects the strength of feeling and the importance of it. One of the issues that we had was that when all of the actions that were set out in that framework, not all of them were resourced, not all of them were capable of being taken forward at the same time. So I do this piece of work jointly with my colleague in the Department for Education, Lindsay Farrell, and Lindsay and I agreed that given the limitations that we could see around how the framework was established, we triggered a gateway review because we wanted outside independent experts to tell us to be able to have those conversations with stakeholders completely honestly without either Lindsay or myself in the room. So unsurprisingly, that gateway resulted in a red rating. So that was in January. We then set about saying, right, what can we do to really refine this and focus on delivery? And our approach to that was to say we're going to do a smaller number of things and we're going to have a greater focus on those. So rather than trying to advance dozens of actions with the resource that we had, we decided that we would really focus in. Ministers came back in February, and both Minister Given and Minister Murphy were extremely clear that this was a very important area, but indeed both those ministers were saying that they wanted to see delivery and they wanted to see difference on the ground. So the ministers then tasked us with taking careers as the first step, as not only something which has been raised actually by many members in this committee as an area of real importance, but also in a way to test how we would build that capacity for joint working. So careers was established as the priority area there for 14 to 19, and subsequently then special educational needs was added to that. So the careers work has been going on now since February in a very involved and at pace, and we're due to take a joint delivery plan to ministers before the end of the calendar year. So we then had the Gateway Review team come back in August to do an update, and I was really pleased along with Lindsay to see that they had upgraded from the assessment in January of red. They'd upgraded by August to amber. So that shows that while nobody ever wants to get a red rating, we had invited that in because we wanted to get the advice and the guidance to get us back on a path to green. But I think one of the really key lessons around that is that often, we have huge ambitions, and that's quite right, but we need to match the ambition to the resources that are available, and to do the profiling that's appropriate in order to have the greatest delivery confidence for the prioritised areas. And I think that's been a really important lesson for us.
Just touching on the Gateway Review, moving from red to amber, what have been the barriers to the departments, both yourself and education, making an effective transition from the framework development actually through to implementation? Is there specific barriers or?
So, what I would say fundamentally that I couldn't say enough in terms of the colleagues in education, their commitment to working with us in a joint way. And the other thing that I think is a huge asset for us is the strength of support that we have from within that education sector, both colleagues in FE but also within schools. But that being said, the two departments are tasked with delivering a huge amount of business as usual. I mean, we can speak in detail on ours, and everybody who has a child at school knows the pressure that the education system is under. So we're both tasked with delivering our business as usual, and we have departmental priorities that are set. And I think the important lesson here, and I think it is a fundamental barrier, is how you really identify and then profile out the capacity that's required for this joint work. Because I think, picking on a point that Ian made earlier, there is no shortage of desire or will among other departments to work in a joined up collaborative way. But the difficulty can be at times where the day job has to take priority. So I think learning from this experience and learning from the other collaborations that we've done, it's where you have a really tight focus on something which is a shared ambition for both parties, and you work on it on that basis, but in a very clear-eyed way about the resources that are required and the associated timescales.
Have I time for one more? Or?
Yes.
So the Department of the Economy is the lead department for many of the actions included in the 14 to 19 Framework Action Plan. How do you work effectively with the Department for Education, and how do you monitor and report on your progress both individually and collectively with the Department of Education?
So I think that's a really important area, because I don't need to rehearse for these members today the fact that I'm responsible through to Ian, and Ian's responsible through to the minister. So where you have that separate constitutional arrangement, the situation that we had whereby I am responsible through to Ian and our minister for delivery on the areas that are for Department for the Economy. Similarly, Lindsay has that reporting structure through her department. And where we now need to take these joint pieces of work, and particularly where they're reflected in the draft programme for government, is where we would then have joint submissions to both ministers, and where then there becomes a cross-cutting element that then, of course, would go on through to the executive. But I think there's definitely a development need there for how we navigate where you have those separate constitutional accountability responsibilities, but also where you have a shared agenda. So I think that's not an area that I think we've cracked perfectly. I think we've still work to do there.
Thank you. Okay, well, Cheryl Brownlee, and then we'll go with Cathal Brown.
Thank you, Chair. £5.5 million is spent each year on the department's career service. So looking through the lens of the strategy, do you think this spend has been effective?
Where do you want to pick that one again?
So the career service, and you'll forgive me for starting with a quote, because there was a piece of independent research done by Dr. Deirdre Hughes on the career service and benchmarked with other career services. So I will quote from Dr. Hughes's work, where she said that our career service in Northern Ireland punches above its weight. So elsewhere, funding would often be twice per capita what's spent here on careers. So I'm confident in saying that we get really good value for money for that, based on the fact that we've this independent piece of research. We are going through a lot of development with the career service at the minute. Career service is probably the area of my group that has the highest rate of vacancies, and that has been a real issue for careers advisors. I'm very proud of the career service. It's a professional and independent, impartial service. They're professionally qualified members of the team, and I'm smiling because every time you meet them, they just are so full of passion for what they do, and they're so committed. Particularly they deal with people of all ages, but particularly young people in transition. So we are doing a lot of work at the minute looking at the careers ecosystem. So that joint piece of work with education has been ongoing, and we're actually really excited to see the outcomes of that. We want to strengthen that ecosystem. Often when we have feedback even from MLAs, it's about a perceived disconnect between careers education delivered by careers teachers in schools and then our careers advisors. So we have a piece of work ongoing to really strengthen that partnership, and to look at not only really strong partnership between our career service and schools, but actually engagement with young people, carers, parents and employers, to make sure that all of that is knitted together to give people the best possible chance of the right advice so that they can fulfil their potential. Something that I think, just picking up on your earlier point, a pilot that the team ran around having a particular approach to their clients who were neurodiverse. So developed a package there with a different way of working, based on the needs that the clients, particularly autistic clients, would have, and they're now seeking to develop that for other client types, to say how do we make sure that what we're delivering is really tuned in to the client that we have in front of us. So I'm confident that it's definitely value for money, but also there's so much passion and commitment within that team to continue to develop. And in particular, we've an IT project, a careers portal, which should also be a game changer for the career service here.
So just in terms of the standardisation, I suppose, of careers advice throughout the whole of Northern Ireland, so to prevent that kind of postcode lottery, how is that service standardised, and is there processes in place to ensure that that is happening right throughout Northern Ireland?
So as far as the career service goes, which is part of our department, absolutely. And those careers advisors are all held to the same professional standards. So as I say, they're qualified to level 6. They are part of a professional organisation. They have CPD, and they I can say with confidence that those careers advisors are all held to the same professional standards. Where we are continuing to work is that engagement with, for example, the sectoral bulletins that I talked about earlier, that engagement with the sectors, because the balance that needs to be struck, the fact that our careers advisors hold their impartiality is really important to them from a professional point of view, but also making sure that they have the awareness of the needs of the economy and all of the sectors that are there. So we're having both those things at the one time.
And just in terms of a strategy then, do you plan to put forward a career strategy? Is that in the pipeline at all?
So we're focusing on delivery. So we have a joint delivery plan will be produced between the work that's gone on from our career service and then colleagues in the Department for Education. So that's nearing its final stages. But there was an independent review of careers took place 2022. So we have been implementing the recommendations from that. So we're in delivery mode.
And how does the department then monitor that delivery? So careers advice is given, it's received. How is that pathway then? Is it continually monitored to know that that was the best advice possible, or like how is that kind of looked at kind of throughout the career of the person? Does that happen?
I'm not sure that we would do it in terms of the career, following through. Yeah. Did the person take that advice and what did they do next? Because obviously, and it's one of the conversations we've been having recently about people don't often travel on a linear path, and the fact that there are things that happen to you in life, or you take up a course and you realise it's not for you. But I think that is something for us to reflect on around that sort of the destination piece. And I think that would be important to think about how we could reflect that.
And in terms of careers advisors, do they also receive continual training and continual education? Because Northern Ireland, everything changes. What was a priority one year may not be the next. So is that continual learning offered to them as well?
Yes, they have to have CPD.
Okay, no problem.
Just to touch on something there, maybe things have changed since I've been at school. I didn't think it was that long ago, but maybe it is. It
is.
So the careers advisor is a school teacher.
No,
that's so that has changed, because my careers advisor, which clearly steered me on on an interesting path, was a PE teacher in the school, and he's great personal, but there's a lot of criticism of the career service generally, from what I picked up as a previous education spokesperson. So I was just wondering.
So that's part of what we're trying to do with this joint work with DE. So the Department for Education is responsible for careers education. We're responsible for the careers service. Yeah. So the careers teacher in school, that pipeline, if you like, is to Department for Education. The careers advisors, which is part of our career service. So careers advisors would go into schools. They're not part of the school. They're not part of the school staff. And we're very hopeful that this piece of work that we've been doing will have really positive outcomes across the board. But it's to try to say, how can we support the careers teachers in schools? How can we work together better? And how can we share resources?
Yeah, I think that's important. You've touched on a very important area. So the earlier this is done, the better, but also in recognising the key areas within our economy that need a particular skill set. So to develop a child or a young person through to that particular level of qualification to satisfy the requirement of the job. But for instance, if some of the big demands is in IT or engineering or in finance, is probably three of the big categories of today. Looking at AI and the development of all of that. What are we doing to ensure that someone that has the life experience in those roles can go on and enthuse and inspire young people to say, I want to do that job. I want to do that job because it's well paid, there's great opportunities, all those things. What's happening about the level of engagement Because if we're not getting that and we're simply hearing from someone that hasn't got that direct experience of that area where we need to upskill people, then we're going to fall short.
I suppose within the schools that, you know, and because we're working jointly with our colleagues in education, but the careers fairs and so on in schools, our careers advisors would attend those, but it would be for the school to organise. But there would also be broader careers fairs that would be organised. You know, I spoke at one last year. So that point about people coming into school and speaking and enthusing the young people, that does happen. It's not one of our activities, but that does happen through education in schools. Our careers advisors put a huge amount of time and effort into staying connected with what is live in the economy and that kind of future focus about what will also be needed. And if I think about taking it back to the personal, so my son had his transition appointment with a careers advisor, sort of a mystery shopper whenever I told the guys in the team. But whenever he was looking to choose his GCSEs, they were making sure, I think at that stage, bearing in mind how young they are, they were making sure that he wasn't ruling anything out. So while he was at an age where he didn't really know what he wanted to do, they were so careful with him to make sure that he wasn't making choices that would limit his options at a later point in time. So I think that's the thing around, you know, our confidence in this as a professional service, and I was certainly very cheered by the fact that it is considered to be something where we are punching above our weight, and I hang on to that, and I'm very proud of them and the work that they do.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add what Maura said, I mean, there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of, so historically we would have had individual companies going into schools and trying to promote their industry and their sector. But we're seeing sort of companies coming together, collaborating on these issues, because it's very difficult for companies who maybe don't have the bandwidth to do it. So I talked earlier on about Mega and their effectiveness. They have been really effective and actually been able to promote that sector, and particularly around the apprenticeship programme has been effective as well. But it also Software NI is a new industry group that has come together and are very effective in actually promoting the sector and better letting young people understand what are the jobs, what is this all about. So as Ian said earlier on, making a decision based on the information, and it's not about the traditional careers that maybe we did at university, but that landscape has changed so significantly. So I think that employer engagement is really important, and I do like the collaboration piece is much more impactful than individual companies going along to schools on an ad hoc basis.
Okay, thank you. Cathal Bynum.
Thanks, Chair. You seem to have done all right for yourself, so thank you very much for your answers so far. Just followed on from that point, I mean, how then is the department engaging, you know, you mentioned some companies, but the likes of AI and Digi services and FinTech, Biotech, how is the department engaging to try and instill apprenticeships and skill sets within that, working with companies and everything else? How are you getting that message out?
Those where the sectoral partnerships come in. So they're involving businesses from those particular sectors, and they help them to design the content of the courses that the young people would undertake, and the content of the apprenticeship training, the content of any other training that we want to bring forward. So that's where we get that kind of buy-in from those businesses, and that's the important mechanism for it.
Just follow on to the point you mentioned, columns area there. The Roman's very good at engineering. Are we? Is it a situation where, or is it a case we're trying to align skill sets with a geographical area, or is those conversations ongoing?
I think so. In the colleges have a really important role to play, where they have much greater connection with industry, what's happening in industry, and what those needs are. So the individual colleges have a really good feel for what the demand is coming from the individual companies, and they will develop courses, particularly those short-term courses that actually meet the needs of the companies. I think the challenge, and where businesses really struggle with, is the interface to get a better understanding of what are those courses, how do I access them, what do I need to do, which was the point that Padraig was making earlier on. And it's that interface between those micro businesses and the colleges. I think there's definitely room for improvement there, and that's why I like that sort of those collaborative networks are really important conduit, because they're able to translate what the industry needs are and how industry actually gets those skills that they need. But it's a two-way conversation as well, because industry is changing so rapidly. We need to ensure that the courses, the curriculum changes on a regular basis. So the interface with the colleges is really important, as well as those sectoral partnerships that Ian talked about.
Okay, and just a final question, and as back to Colin mentioned the 14-19 framework, and there's a number of challenges there to be addressed. One of those is the competition between the schools and the duplication of provision and all of that. What is the extent of that competition and the duplication of provision, and what's been done to address it?
I think it's quite hard to answer what the extent is. So committee members be aware that there's an entitlement framework for young people, and where that works really well, a young person could be doing A-levels, could be doing 2 A-levels in school, and could go out one day a week to do a vocational course in an FE college. So the concept of the entitlement framework is really strong. I think what we've seen increasingly is young people staying on at sixth form in school to do vocational courses. So I'm not an education expert, so I wouldn't pass any judgment on whether or not that's the right or wrong thing to do. However, what I would say is that the FE colleges have the industry standard spec, they've got the equipment, and often those FE colleges would be the best place for a young person to go, particularly if they're thinking about the kinds of vocational choices that we talked about before. So this is something that comes up perennially. It comes up where schools will say that there are really good reasons for young people to stay with them, and colleges will say that those are young people that in the past would have been going to FE college after school at 16. So working through those issues, that post-16 in particular, that will be something that will be a very, very important point for us to come to on the 14 to 19 piece.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Colin Gilderney.
Thank you, and thank you all for the presentation and the questions and answers to date. So Daniel had mentioned there in passing around the skills landscape, which is extremely complex and confusing, I suppose, at times for maybe employers and maybe even young people or people looking to navigate. But the Skills Council is a key element of that, only meeting 4 times a year. Do you think that is an effective structure, that Skills Council model?
Certainly, in its first year, it's got off to a very good start. So it has been fully operational since the beginning of September of last year. In that period of time, it's produced the Digital Skills Action Plan, a really good piece of work, very close to publishing the Green Skills Action Plan, also a very substantial piece of work. And as Graham and Moira have mentioned, bits of work around diversity and inclusion and other. So it has definitely gone off to a good start, and it seems to have got a lot of traction, got a lot of presence, has established itself incredibly quickly. So we were going to review its operation, how it works after a 3-year period. Because it's made such a fast start, I think there's an opportunity maybe to have a look at it a bit earlier. So we're going to start next February after 18 months to see what else we could do around that structure to support and strengthen it. And some of the things we've got here, this is a voluntary set of people. I mean, the fact that they've done this amount of work in this space of time with no pay, it's a real testament to their dedication to the subject. So we need to look at what kind of support we can put in place for the Skills Council, so that it's not simply secretariat and organising meetings and so forth, but it is actually something substantial that we can help support them with. But so far, that appears to be working incredibly well for us.
Yeah, and I do acknowledge that contribution and that voluntary element to it, absolutely. But I suppose I'm also conscious of some of your opening remarks where you talked about significant acceleration will be needed and the pace of change needs to improve. The Skills Council is, I understand, undertaking a review and rationalisation exercise in the crowded and in that landscape. So is that the skill that was the review was to be scheduled in 2027? You're saying is being brought forward to.
No, that's different.
That's different. So that 2027 review then, Is that urgent enough given all of the pressures we're discussing here? And should we look at bringing that forward to
It's
feed
that-
into this work?
We've mentioned them several times now. These are the sectoral partnerships. So what this is a review of and an attempt to rationalise or simplify is the structure below where the Skill Council is now, which is to look at all those sectoral partnerships with industries and businesses. So are they correctly delineated? Is there any overlap? Is there gaps between them? And what could we do to change and make that easier for individual companies to understand, so that they're able to engage with that more effectively? Now, the difficulty we've got here is that, I've already mentioned that we've got some quite challenging targets to meet, and we have got a set of partnerships which are doing effective work at the minute. What we can't do is sort of start and chop that up too quickly without thinking through effectively what it is that the stakeholders in those particular sectors need, what might be added to or taken away from any one of the individual partnerships and how they would interface together, and then make sure that the transition between the current arrangement that we've got and the new one that we want to put in place is actually managed effectively. Now, that without disrupting or diminishing any of the services provided to any individual learner or any business that depends on the skills supply coming from the system, as well as increasing the number of people who are coming through with the relevant qualifications. So that's a delicate task to do, not something I think would want to rush. And if the industry, business, trade union and academic members of the Skills Council are advising us that we need to give it 2.5 or 3 years to do, I think I'm going to take their advice on that rather than try and push it much harder than it needs to be.
Any concern that by the end of the strategy in 2030, enough will have changed to make that real significant step change difference you're talking about?
Well, there are a number of different things then in governance. So that's the oversight of the Skills Council and those representative partnerships. And there are other things, and the report mentions this. So, for example, we didn't get to set up a full cross-departmental steering group or programme board for this. Skills strategy governance was set up as a programme, which isn't actually an appropriate mechanism to deliver this effectively. So we have, and I think quite rightly, pulled back from that programme arrangement to look at something more effective, and not least of which a programme typically does not have a fixed end date, and if you're working to a strategy which is seeking to achieve certain outputs by a particular date, in this case 2030, that's not an appropriate mechanism or structure to deliver. So we are then going to put in place much more effective and appropriate governance arrangements, which will start and then take away the duplication. And then this is where you get into what the providers in different departments do. So between ourselves, the Department for Education, Department for Communities, Department of Health, which is an interest in health skills pipeline, and the Department of Agriculture are the main players in this space. Then you've got the universities and the FE colleges. So that would be the governance structure through which we will then try to drive forward that change. We have set up a tertiary education sector senior leaders forum. It meets every quarter. That was initially set up to deal with some of the practical challenges of COVID about social distancing and so forth. But now we're getting into using that forum as a way to try and chart how we will work together much more effectively. And there's been tremendous engagement on that to this the 3 meetings that I've attended, and I go to all of them. And so I think that we will be successful in putting in place an arrangement which will make sure we have a higher chance of success. Nothing's guaranteed in this world, of course. You don't know what's going to happen in the next 7 years, but if we get the right structures in place and we get ourselves set up going on the right track, and that we think through carefully and bring everybody along with us, then we're giving ourselves the fairest chance possible.
And that very neatly leads me to my final one. So it's already a complicated landscape, 11 labour market partnerships, 15 sector partnerships, 6 FE colleges, 5 HE, higher education, private sector, employers, all of that. Alongside and additional to all of that, in a huge part of the north and my own part of the constituent country, along that border corridor, there is also part of the landscape is colleges and employers and people from the other side of the border. So what work is being done to ensure that we're harmonising that. And I know from speaking to my own South West College, which I attended myself, I did my social work degree there, I actually couldn't have done the degree without being able, as a very mature student, I couldn't have done it without that local access, but that's a separate point. But they have told me that the model of colleges in the South is much more reactive to the needs of business, and that they have sort of almost cracked it in a sense. So how can we, or how are we going to learn, coordinate and harmonise that approach along that very crucial border corridor?
In September, I went to Dublin and met my counterpart in the Department for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Skills. In fact, one of my counterparts, there's three counterparts to my role down there. So, and we got into the discussion about a lot of the things we're doing already on a cross-border basis. So we have got joint projects using Peace Plus funding, and we do a number of things jointly. And we've been looking at things like removing the barriers to cross-border student mobility. So currently, nearly everybody in the north thinking about a university place will look to Belfast or east across to Britain. Everybody in the Republic looks to universities down there. In fact, the most striking when you go to places like Dundalk and Newry, for example, just how stark that dividing line is at the border. So there's lots of things we can do to support that movement and make it easier for people to go across the border. In January, we are going down as a senior leadership team in the Skills and Education group to go and meet with the senior team from the Southern Department, where we're going to talk about what we can do to work more effectively jointly, drawing up policy, things that we have been working on and how effective they've been, and actually to learn from what each other have been doing in delivery. Because we've got some successful projects up here where we are achieving on individual schemes more effective completion rates on similar kinds of programs than they are in the Republic. So there are lessons that we can teach them, as well as lots of things that we can learn from them. So we're building up that cross-border practical working relationship. On an ongoing basis, there are lots of things that we're working on jointly in individual projects, but I think if we get into that more regular meeting with them and can share that best practice and learning, there's a lot we can both learn on both sides of the border.
And just on from that, is this a recent approach, or is this something that the department have always done in terms of meeting the counterparts in the south, or has that relationship enhanced in recent times?
Well, it's something that we've always worked jointly on individual projects. So there's always been cross-border skills projects with European funding, peace money, and that kind of thing. We have been working jointly in the northwest. There's a forum or a project in the northwest involving Magee and Donegal. So there's a lot of activity happens on a cross-border basis. I don't know what my predecessor has done in this, or any of my predecessor done in this regard. It's simply when I came into the job, I sort of realised I didn't know any of them. So I went down to meet them, and then that started the conversations, and then we've got this, we've agreed that it will be very useful to meet up and have this discussion.
You did quite well, yeah.
And maybe potential for shared island funding
Yes,
as well.
absolutely.
So I think you make a really good point about the fact that the border corridor, the colleges work really well with their counterparts, and indeed we had colleagues from the FE sector in the south up on a study visit, because we would absolutely accept that we've a lot to learn. In particular, our approach to capital development within the FE sector is something that colleagues from the Republic would look to learn from us. So that operational level contact is really strong, and I think we're trying to reinforce it at the policy and departmental level.
Yes, good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your time with us and your answers so far. But lack of joined-up government has been a problem in the past and seems to be a continuing problem right across our departments. Indeed, in your own report back in 2020, this was identified as a problem. And one of the recommendations in the current skills strategy is for a cross-departmental management board with representations from all departments. Only 3 departments are actually represented on the skills strategy programme. Why then was a whole government approach not achieved?
So we've kind of touched on a number of aspects of this so far during the question, but I suppose this kind of brings it together. The whole of government approach with the skills strategy being announced and then the executive and the assembly not functioning for a period of time, it becomes quite difficult when you don't have an executive agreed strategy to get that engagement across all departments. So, and again, I mentioned the fact that it was set up as a programme board, or it was to be set up as a programme board, and that wasn't an appropriate mechanism to deliver the skills strategy, and something that we want to look at replacing with a more appropriate mechanism. What we have done instead, and this is where we get more effective impact, I think, is work jointly on projects with individual departments. So I mentioned earlier on about the one with the health service, but we have examples from every single department. I picked up in the news yesterday, Hyde Bank College, for example, has now been regarded, it's got full marks from a recent inspection, having been 10 years ago one of the worst young offender institutions in the UK. We have been working closely and jointly with the prison service in relation to that. So now there's training opportunities for the residents of Hyde Bank Wood. It's now called Hyde Bank Wood College, and there's a reason for it. We connect that into the work that we do. So lots of examples of specific projects where we're making lots of progress on dealing with particular problems. So we get a lot of buy-in from all our departments in relation to that. I think the next stage of this development is going to be moving beyond a lot of bilateral, or in some cases trilateral projects where we're working with one department or another two departments and try to bring that together around particular issues. So we've mentioned, for example, disabled people, or there might be people with special educational needs. There are things they need to bring more projects, more departments, more bodies in to work jointly and producing solutions for some of those projects. But I think the best way, and my experience, and I think Moira would share this view, having come from the Department of Communities, the best way to achieve this cross-departmental working is to focus on particular solutions that are required to problems that cross across a number of departments' boundaries.
In the absence of cross-departmental arrangements, how do you find that the engagement with the other departments and seeking to get them all to come together?
Well, I think that we found that there's no challenge or difficulty whatsoever in getting people to work jointly on a solution to a particular issue. So if we are able to assist them and work jointly with them to help with a skills issue that affects that department and an issue that they want to deal with, then that's or to help them deliver an outcome using skills and education interventions, they are certainly very willing usually to engage with us to discuss that and then actually to implement things.
Are you confident progress has been made in this issue then?
I think we've seen a lot of very positive activity in this area. Yeah.
Any other members anything to add? Cal?
Chair, just I wanted to mention this wee question. Ian, just in terms of collaboration, because it's been mentioned a number of times, do you feel, how do you find, is it your responsibility to drive collaboration between further education colleges, education providers and the likes of CAFRE, or do you engage with a different department to do that, or is that your responsibility?
Well, is it my responsibility? Yes, I think it's everybody who's involved in senior management in any organisation's got a responsibility to do that. I met the new principal of CAFRE just at the start of the week. So there are lots of opportunities for this joint working. So I am looking actively at where it can help bring those agencies together and where we can see opportunities and develop their relationships and make sure that they work. Collaboration is an easy thing to talk about. It's a bit more challenging to make work in practice, but if you focus on specific problems which require solutions, then people are more than willing to get involved in those collaborative efforts.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, just a wee quick follow-up. You'd mentioned in your reply to Chair on the Skills Council, you'd said it was impossible to include everyone, and I think you'd said there were 6 areas or 6 employers represented. From what areas do those 6 employers come in terms of sector?
Well, they're public appointees. Oh, I'll have to get the list out. Hold on. Does anybody have the list? So there's one from Digital. It was John Healy, who is now the chair of Invest NI, and he's been replaced by Deborah, I forget her surname. She is Lorna McAdoo. Yeah, she's with Version 1 software company based in Belfast.
Sectors really is real. I'm trying to get my head around what sectors are in there.
So that's the digital sector. Then we have also, can you remember, Graham?
No, they weren't. So these were individuals who. So we didn't take a sectoral-based approach. So it was an open competition for people who wanted to apply for these. In terms of the sectors, it's really. That's delivered through the task and finish groups. So we would have had a task and finish group, for example, on the digital working group. So John Healy would have chaired that. So that would have been engaged. So the sectoral piece we're doing on a case-by-case basis. The green skills one is the next one that we're looking at. And again, the point around collaboration, where we have Northern Ireland Electricity, Gordon Parks chairs that group. We have the Housing Executive, Northern Ireland Water, all of the key players in that area. So where we have a particular issue that we want to drill into, then we make sure that we have the right people around the table. So that's how we're dealing with that sectoral piece. So rather than having lots of sectors talking about things that they don't see as relevant, we're drilling down into issues.
Could you send us the six so that we can get an idea?
Give you the list of the members.
Separate to that, we the sectoral partnerships, the 19 that we have on apprenticeships. So for every apprenticeship framework that we have a sectoral partnership wrapped around that. But the point I was making earlier about, that's a huge piece of progress from what had been something that was simply procured as is and implemented. But we want to see, can we take that to the next level? So
I'm specifically trying to get my head around the Skills Council, how inclusive that is. So if you send that through.
You'll send the committee a list of the members of the Skills Council.
Moira, what you've just said there is what our counterparts in the South do extremely well. So there's learning there from best practice that we could shadow here fairly quickly. Just a final question for me. We acknowledge that it is difficult to ensure that the funded skills provision aligns with the skills needs and the skills strategy, but this is critical to success. Can you assure us that you have a clear way forward to achieve that?
I think that with the Skills Council getting off to such a good start, and with some of the other mechanisms I've talked about here, which is like the Tertiary Education Senior Leaders Forum and the work that we're doing with it, I think that we do have a pathway to achieve that,
Good. Okay. Drina, is there anything you'd like to add? No, you're happy? Stuart?
Just one brief comment, Chair, if that's okay. Just to add really to some of the discussions earlier. I know that there was a line of questioning earlier on about independent evaluation, and I think Mr. Snowden pointed to the profession structure, so we can rotate the staff to try to get professional standards and fresh pairs of eyes on things as business cases are developed in those projects. The Department of Finance is also involved. My colleagues in the Supply Division conduct an annual test drilling exercise where they look at post-project evaluation, not just for this department, for all departments across the board. So I think it's helpful just to recognise that activity is also in place, and it's a level of accountability that important evaluation work takes place and has an independent aspect.
Okay. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, members, content? Okay. Thank you to all of you, Mr. Snowden, Mr. Wilkinson, Mrs. Darley, for being with us and for taking questions for 2 hours. We appreciate your time.
Not all.
It flew in when you're having fun, We're aiming to publish the report in the new year, so we appreciate this important, critical session today. And also only thank Stuart and Julie for being with us, and the Northern Ireland Audit Office team with Darina there as well. So, and thank you for the assistance with the inquiry. So, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, members, further evidence session is scheduled to be held on the 5th of December 2024 at 2 o'clock here in the Senate chamber, when the committee will hear from officials from the Department of Education. If we require any further oral evidence, we will contact the Department for Economy after this. So, okay. Members, are you content to move into closed session?
Yep.
Senate Chamber. Sound